Hello everybody, welcome back to Read and Reread, and welcome to take 2 of my video about my favorite dystopian novels of the year. The last one I got halfway through and realized I completely left out some of the books that were library books, and rather than try to figure out the mysteries of filming all those separately and putting them together, I just decided to start over. So, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, ho ho ho. It's time to tiptoe through those desolate, barren wastelands and those bleak futures and talk about some dystopian and post-apocalyptic novels. Now, why am I doing this right now? Well, I got inspired the other day. Everyone was talking about Prophet Song by Paul Lynch winning the Booker Prize, and I found myself commenting somewhere, I can't remember where, that I thought that was a good book, had some strengths and weaknesses, not my favorite dystopian novel, or really even my favorite one that I read this year. So then I thought to myself, what was your favorite one? So I went back looking through my journal, and I thought I was going to find maybe half a dozen books that fit into this category, and then I could think about what was my favorite. Well, guess what? I found not 6, not 8, not 10, but 12, including the one that I am reading right now. So the project thickened, and now it's a video, and I'm just going to talk about these books that I read this year, and I'm combining dystopian and apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic. I think they're related, and even though the reason for whatever the bleak, whether it's a totalitarian regime or a stratified society or a survival tale in the wake of some kind of a disaster, they're related, they're cousins, and sometimes they're even in the same book. Sometimes something terrible has happened to devastate humankind, and then some sort of a dystopian regime comes up in its wake. So anyway, a lot of people love this genre. Some people don't care for it at all, and you probably have already left if you're one of those people. But for everybody else, here's the ones that I read this year, and I really have trouble with ranking things, but I have taken a stab at it. So let's see what we have. And I think I'm going to take off this shirt because it's hot. I live in some sort of a climate change dystopia, and it's hot. So anyway, here we go. Number 12 was a book that I no longer have. I've already unhauled it. I banished it and sent it on its merry way because it disappointed me, and that was Scary Monsters by Michelle de Kretser. Now, this was kind of a double disappointment, maybe a triple disappointment. The first disappointing factor was that this book was recommended by one of my favorite authors, Emily St. John Mandel. I heard her recommend it in a podcast, and then I found this book at Book People in Austin, my favorite independent bookstore, and so I bought it. The second disappointing thing was that, now, the fact that it was 2 novellas was not the disappointing part, but only one of them was a dystopian book, and the other one was just this story set in the 80s that was boring. So that was disappointing thing number 2. And they didn't really connect, except that they each had to do with people of Asian ancestry who had immigrated at some point to Australia. But one of the stories it wasn't set in Australia either. I think it was set in London or Paris, but the character was an Australian of Asian descent. And then the other story was set in Australia, and it was dystopian, and it had some interesting features, but it just wasn't that well developed, and it wasn't subtle or nuanced. It had to do with a near future with a very racist government and a family that's trying to always kind of downplay their roots in an effort to assimilate and keep up with other people in their social group, but their grown children are not really cooperative in this. One of them's become an activist, and then there's an elder euthanasia theme in the story, and I think I'm making it sound more interesting than it was, but it just wasn't that good. For me, anyway. Maybe you would love it. I didn't love it. So let's go to number 11. Number 11 is a book that I have, and it was Land of Milk and Honey by C. Pam Zhang. This one also, I didn't dislike this book, but I didn't love it either. And it kind of disappointed me, to be honest. First of all, I had not read anything by this author, but I had heard really excellent reviews of her first book, How Much of These Hills is Gold. And I've seen this book pop up on some end of year lists, but I just didn't think it was that strong. It is a kind of a climate change dystopian story where something has happened and this terrible smog has gone across the earth. And after a couple of years of this smog never lifting, most of the natural crops and animal food sources have all died out. And people are more and more, they've used up all the reserves and the alternatives, and they're kind of subsiding on synthesized food products. And this is very difficult for the main character, who is an unnamed woman who is a chef. And so she takes an opportunity when she's offered a job to be a chef at a very ultra elite selective community that's up on a mountaintop. And they are so high up that they're kind of above the smog. And she's going to be able to cook with actual real food items. So she takes this job, not knowing much about this community or its owner or creator, who's an elusive Musk-like billionaire. And so she goes up there and she finds out that there are some interesting things going on. There's some Dr. Moreau-ish stuff going on up there. There's some bizarre rich people games being played, and she wasn't really chosen for the reason that she thought she was. It kind of read like a weird Netflix special that you get halfway through and you think, this is kind of preposterous, but now I have to see what happens. There was kind of one too many really crazy wheels off things going on here, and the original premise that I wanted to think more about wasn't really explored. It kind of turned more into how ultra wealthy people are the powerful ones, and they can manipulate and get bogged down in their bizarre games, and it kind of went a different direction than what I was looking for. So that was number 11. Number 10 was a library book, but I'll put a picture up here, and it was The Ferryman by Justin Cronin. And I liked this book. Everything else, 10 all the way down, these are all books that I really did enjoy, and I'm not going to have a bunch of disappointing comments about them. But this one, Stephen recommended it, and I checked it out. It's a big, long book. That's really my only negative thing to say about it, is it did not need to be as long as it was. It is a kind of a mystery, thriller, science fiction, dystopian novel about it could be the future or just an alternative to our reality, where people are living in this divided community. There's an island and then a mainland, and there's sort of a have and have not situation where some people are living in this very idealized community where everyone is super fit and healthy and they live really, really long, and there are no children. When you get to be a certain age and you've been in a marriage for a certain amount of time, which you can set contracts and links and move around and switch that out when you want to. You can adopt, but you get a person who's almost grown up. You get a kind of an older teenager. And when you get old, you go and get recycled and regenerated into one of these younger teenagers. And then on the other part of off the island or whatever, people just live like regular people, and they're like the service class. So there's a dude who, his job is the ferryman, and he takes the old people across when they're going to leave and go get recycled. And on the day that he takes his own father, there's a glitch in the system, and his dad tries to run away, and he tells them some bizarre things, and it just kind of sets some stuff into motion. There's a lot of weird surprises in this book. It's kind of a crazy plot, but it's really fun, and I think it would make an interesting TV show. So that was my number 10. Number 9 was also a library book that I read really early this year, and it was Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng. This was an interesting book for this author to put out because it's nothing like her previous works. In this one, after a financial crisis and collapse, the China is scapegoated as the reason behind this and some other related catastrophes that occur. And there's a racist America in its wake where Asian language and culture are very much discouraged, and it's a hazardous situation to be an Asian person in this culture. And the main characters of this story are a child whose mother was a Chinese poet who she's run off and gone into hiding, or we don't even really know if she's alive at the beginning of the story, because her work was targeted as being anti-American. And the little boy's, his name is Bird, and his father is white, and the child is not, he can pass for white. He's not obviously Asian to everyone. And his dad tries to just keep the peace, not make waves at work, not to stand out, tries to encourage his kid to fly under the radar and not draw attention to the fact that he is the child of this woman. But he receives a piece of mail that suggests that she's alive, and he decides he wants to try to find her. So that is the premise. The story was good. I read it so early in the year, I can't remember exactly why it didn't stick with me and come to my mind immediately as one of my favorites. I think that it was the conclusion. There were some things at the end that fell into place much too easily, and then the big to-do at the end, it didn't really ta-da me that much. But I liked the setting, and I really liked, she had an epilogue where she talks about how this structure is not that particularly far-fetched when you look at the American history, including the current history of anti-Asian sentiments. And it is an interesting thing to think about. Number 8 was a reread. It was Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Now, this was kind of interesting because I reread 1984 first this year, and then I thought, well, now I need to read Brave New World again, because when I read them in my youth, I loved them both, but I liked Brave New World more, and I wanted to see if I still felt like that. And the surprise was I did not. I actually felt upon rereading that 1984 was the stronger of the works. I do like the world that is created in Brave New World is intriguing, but the plot and the treatment of the female characters and the racism involving the indigenous civilization that they go and visit, all of that just kind of aged really poorly, and it kind of disrupted my enjoyment of the book. But in this book, people are discouraged from forming lasting relationships. Promiscuity is encouraged. Nobody has children physically. They're test tube made, and they're highly engineered to fit into one of 5 levels from alpha to epsilon, and engineered to be cognitively, psychologically, physically suited to the type of labor or work that they are going to be pursuing. So there's not a lot of social unrest, but everybody is geared and altered to fit into those niches. And so that is an intriguing concept, and how not a lot of people in the story really stop and think about the ethical implications of this. And there's really no culture or art or beauty going on anymore. Everything's very fast, cheap kind of entertainment. Don't think too deeply, just do your work and pursue physical pleasures, and that's about it. But there is a disruption when they find out about what happened with a woman who disappeared on an expedition years ago. The things that age poorly kind of messed it up for me, though, and I still think it's an important piece if you are a fan or a student of dystopian literature. It is an important book to read. As an enjoyable read, it just had its issues for me this time around. So that brings us up to number 7, and the book that inspired this entire video, which is Prophet Song by Paul Lynch. I was so excited when I heard about this book in the Booker, I guess it was when it was still in the long list, that I ordered it from Blackwell so that I could get it earlier than the US scheduled release. It does have a fabulous cover. I'll give it that. It has a beautiful cover, and it is a good book. For me, it was not a great book. In this book, Lynch imagines a totalitarian government rather rapidly taking over Ireland. And our main character is a woman who tragically spends too long procrastinating in her response to this. Her husband goes missing at the beginning of the story. He's a union organizer, and he's been taken in. Basically, he's been disappeared, but she doesn't really understand that at first. And she spends a long time trying to rely on the legal functions of society to help her figure out where her husband is and when he'll be released. And she's not recognizing that society is breaking down. Now, I felt for her because she's a woman with 4 children from teenage to baby, and a father who's slipping into dementia, and she's just now going back to work after the birth of her surprise 4th child. And so I understand how inconvenient a dystopian breakdown would be for somebody at this point in life, but this woman, Isla, she takes forever to understand how severe the situation is. And I think that Lynch wanted us to think about, well, what would we do? Would we see and understand what was happening, or would we try to make life work and try to assume that these are temporary aberrations and things are going to settle down? What would we do? And I can go with that for a while, but she prolongs it for so long in her inconsistency and her hesitation to act, even in the face of multiple times where people are trying to bring it to her attention. Anyway, she just drove me nuts. The last part of the book I thought was the strongest. The very beginning, where things are changing and everyone's trying to figure it out, was very intriguing. There's a huge, frustrating, long piece in the middle, and finally she looks around and realizes the world is at war and I better do something. And then at the end, I don't want to give away, but the things that are happening in the last, I guess, third of the book, I thought were very compelling because they are the most realistic and the most aligned with things that actual people are going through today in different parts of the world. So that was the strength and the weakness of Prophet Song, in my opinion. And it comes in right in the middle of my list of dystopian books that I read this year. Number 6 was that reread of 1984. I read it as part of the banned book club at the public library, and it was interesting to read it again at this different point in life and talk about it with a really kind of a group of people of all different ages. And some who were reading it for the first time, and some like me who had read it back in school or when they were younger and were going back through it again. And it really does stand up as a classic of the genre. It's not a perfect book. There is an immense slowdown in the middle of the book when the main character is reading a long political tract that's just really, frankly, quite boring. But the thrill of reading this book again and just jumping into that world with all the catchphrases of Big Brother is watching you and 2 minutes hate and double speak and all that kind of stuff. It was fun to read again, and the obviously doomed romance between Winston and Julia, and I was just there for all of that. I thought that the first half of the book is the best, but I can see why my younger self was enthralled with that part, not in a happy way, but just like shocked and just imagining what if the world was like this. So it was kind of nostalgic in that way as well. And I did think it was still a very strong novel, and I'm glad to have read it again and got to think about all these things all over again. Now we come to the top 5, and this was really tough for me because my number 1 is solid. I'm not disputing that that was my favorite one of the year, but 2, 3, 4, yes. It could go, it's just like, here's 3 books. So, or maybe it's 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I can't count either. But it's sort of a jumble. It could go this way or that way. So I'm just going to show them to you, but they're all basically really, they're all number 2, okay? So number 5 / number 2 was Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. This is either my favorite book or my 5th favorite book. I don't know. This was so good. And it is a sequel though. So hold on. You have to read Parable of the Sower first because it is a sequel. And I strongly recommend this pair of books. Parable of the Sower, this is when things kind of fall apart in society. Global climate change and economic crisis lead to social chaos in the early 2020s. California becomes full of dangers from pervasive water shortage to masses of vagabonds who will do anything to live to see another day. Now, keep in mind, this book was written in the 70s. No, I'm lying. This book was written in 1993. I was thinking of Kindred for a second. So in 1993, she was imagining this crisis in the 2020s. And this young girl becomes a leader, 15-year-old Lauren Olamide, who lives inside a gated community with her preacher father, family, and neighbors. So when things completely hit the fan, she rises up as a leader. And then in the book that I read this year, Parable of the Talents, we kind of are in 2 time periods. We are in what happened next with Lauren Olamide and her establishment of the community of Earthseed. And then we're also in the future a little ways, where her daughter is now a young woman who's trying to learn about the mother that she never knew. So we have all kinds of insanely prescient situations here. And we also have that quest of a young person to understand her legacy and to understand a mother who made choices that were not always necessarily oriented towards her role as a wife or a mother, or even her own individual self, but based on the community that she has founded and her mixed feelings about that, the daughter's mixed feelings about her mother's commitments. So it's just, they are excellent. They will blow your mind, I promise. Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. So then number 4 / another number 2 is the book that I'm reading right now. And I totally forgot for a second. When I was making this list, I had 11 books, and then I said, oh, you know what? Guess what I'm reading right now? I'm rereading Never Let Me Go for Remember December under the category of what do I think about it now? What do I think about it now? I think that it is devastating me all over again and in a deeper way. Just knowing, okay, this is a book where you can't tell a whole lot about it to someone who hasn't read it. So here's what I will say. It is a book about a young woman named Kathy who has a job as a carer, and it appears that she cares for people that are donating organs. And she is reflecting back on her upbringing at a special boarding school called Hailsham. And as you read about her memories and especially her thoughts about her 2 closest friends, Ruth and Tommy, you realize that this group of children have been raised for a special purpose in society. That's all I'm going to say. But knowing everything that is gradually revealed throughout the course of this novel in a reread makes it hit deeper and sadder. But it also gives you time because you're not trying to work out, well, what is going on here? I already know what's going on. Now I can really look at these relationships. And that is also making it so satisfying. So that is number 2, 3, 4. I don't know, but it is, if you've never read it, you should really add it to your list. All right, number 3 is Moon of the Crusted Snow by Waubgeshig Rice. I'm doing better with this name. I will be seeking out the sequel to this book and other books by this author. There's a bookmark in it because Stephen is reading it now. But I'm going to digress for a minute and show you this fantastic bookmark. My daughter made this for him, and she did that freehand. She just looked at a picture of where the wild things are. I made him this bookmark based on one of his favorite books. But anyway, this was really good. I just talked about it last week. It is a book about a northern Canadian Indian reservation community that suddenly finds itself going into a deep winter, being cut off from the outside world. The power, the phone lines, everything has gone down. Supplies are not coming in. They don't know what's happened, but they need to come up with a plan to survive. And it is a story also about colonialism, about traditional roles and skills, and the value of maintaining those. And there's just a lot of great things in a slim volume. It's super tense, it's super suspenseful, and I loved it. The last of the number twos, and a book that I really need to reread soon, is one that I read right at the beginning of the year, How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. This is a group of interrelated short stories, and there's an overarching plot that kind of pulls it together and makes it into a novel. And that is that a virus has accidentally been released from the Arctic when a girl that was preserved in ice from thousands of years ago, they thaw her out for scientific purposes, but they accidentally unleash a pandemic that mainly targets children. And it is a long-running global pandemic, and in the wake of this pandemic, we have different explorations of loss and grief. And each story is different. It is definitely a science fiction novel. There are surprises at the end that help explain a lot of things that happen all the way through. Some of the stories, if you read it, you might like some more than others, but I've been meaning for a while to reread this now that I know some things that you find out at the end that I think will enhance my enjoyment of how it goes all the way through. But this was a book that I loved, very unusual structure. And that leaves us with number one. And it's probably no surprise if you watch this channel at all. My favorite book, which is a post-apocalyptic book rather than a dystopian novel, is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This was my favorite one of this year. It was a reread, and it is one of my favorite books, period, in general, of all time. I love this novel. I reread it. The second I got to the end, I was sad and I wanted to start it a third time. And I think everyone knows what this is about. A terrible flu has wiped out about 98-99% of the earth. It was a fast, like people got it and they would die within 48 hours. And there's a small band of survivors. There's a piece about when that happens in the timeline, and then there's a fast forward. The bulk of the story takes place 20 years later, and a group of traveling performers who are Shakespearean actors and musicians, they travel in a circuit and they play for the little pockets of living people. Of course, they play for living people. What am I saying? No, they go around and they play out in the air to dead people. No, they go around to the little civilizations, little communities that have popped up, and they bring beauty and life to the people as they travel. There's different people that we kind of move around to at different time periods. Some of it takes place when the pandemic was unfolding. Some of it's people within this community. Some of it's people that live at an airport. There's a whole community that lives at an airport that all lived because they were on a plane that didn't have the virus on it and they got grounded at just the right time. So all of these things are happening, and at the heart of it all, there is a graphic novel, a partial graphic novel called Station 11 that a child in the story receives shortly before all this happens, that is important to the whole thing. And it's just so beautiful. It is just fabulous. And this one out of all of them is the best at providing a thrill of hope. And I don't know, I just love it. And just talking about it, I want to read it again. Okay, so that's it. That is the 12 dystopian and apocalyptic novels of 2023. I don't think I will be squeezing another one of that genre in before the end of the year because I have a TBR planned out and there aren't any other books like that. But I will start it up all over again in 2024. And I'll probably start it up with this one. I want to read this one again. So let me know how you feel about any of these books or other books that you think I should put on my list that you think I would love in this category. And I hope that you are also having an excellent week, and I will be back on Friday for Friday Reads. Bye-bye.